Hi, everybody. Hope you're doing marvellously well. This is a very exciting interview for me because we're going to talk again with the incredible Mr. Stephen Street, but this time we're going to focus on one band and one band only, the Cranberries. So without any further ado, let's talk to Mr. Stephen Street about his incredible work with the Cranberries.
Yeah, so Linger was on. I do remember hearing it on that first meeting that I had at Island Records. They were signed by Denny Cordell. Denny Cordell is a producer in his own right. Denny was a very well-connected chap. He was quite a well-known, quite upper middle class. He had, all the connections and things. He was quite a dapper chap. Anyway, he signed them, and they were signed to the American side of Island Records.
Oh, interesting.
Which politically we will get onto later on, because there was a problem with that, because the people at Island in the UK hadn't signed the Cranberries. You found there was a certain kind of antipathy, I would say, directed towards them. And it definitely kind of hindered, I think, at the initial release of the album. But we'll get onto that. But anyway, Denny signed them. And so it was with him that I had the meeting, because Denny came over to the UK and I went to Island Records to have a chat with him. And he played me a cassette of a few songs. And Linger was on that. And I think Dreams was on there too. And a few others, And I was asked whether I'd be interested in working with them. I liked what I heard. I could tell, they were kind of fans of the kind of Sundays, the Cocteau Twins, that kind of stuff, the kind of thing that I thought was interesting, and was definitely kind of, you could see it was connected somehow to the Smiths and the things that I'd worked on in the past. So I thought, yeah, great. So let's do something. So I said, I'd like to see them live. And so I went along to see them play at the Marquee. They were okay. It weren't brilliant, but there was something there. I mean, Dolores was so nervous as a front woman. She wouldn't even face the audience. She kind of sang sideways on. The crowd were there. She's singing to Noel. It was just like she was really, really nervous about everything. But there was something there. I said to Danny, I definitely would like to do something. And he said, well, what songs do you want to do? And I picked out Dreams, and I picked out Linger as well. He said, well, I don't want you to do that one yet. I want to let's just hold that one back, and we'll do a test session first, do a couple of other songs, and we'll see how we go. There was a small studio that was part of the Windmill Lane setup, but it wasn't the Windmill Lane that was down by the docks where you two were. It was a Windmill, I think it's St. Stephen's Green, which is in Dublin. Forgive me, I can't remember the actual name of the green, but it's a rectangular green that's at the top of the high street in Dublin City. And there was a smaller studio there. And in fact, I think Def Leppard had been kind of in situ there for over a year or so. They were really kind of in their tax exile days. And back then, British acts could go and live in Ireland and get the tax breaks. Quite a small little studio, but pretty well equipped. Wasn't too bad. I can't remember the desk. I think it might have been an MCI. If it was, I remember feeling quite at home with it. And I had trained on an MCI when I started at Island Records. And we did a 2-week session, and we did Dreams within that session and a couple of tracks, and took the songs back to Denny, who was still in London at that time. In fact, he came over, actually, if I remember rightly. Yeah, he did. He popped over to see how things were going. And it all went great. So it was like, okay, fine, you can do the album now. So yes, I went over to Ireland, as I say, to do this initial session, and it was great. The only thing was, I was staying in a hotel around the corner from the studio, and the band and Dolores' boyfriend at the time were holed up in some little house kind of a couple of miles away. But the only thing that was a little bit of a fly in the ointment for me was that when we got in the studio and we started tracking and everything, when it came to doing Dolores' overdub, she wanted her boyfriend to be there in the room. And I was like, well, it's not really, I'm not going to be second guessed by this guy all the time. This guy was an artist in his own right. He's the guy that you can hear singing at the end of Dreams, doing that kind of Gaelic kind of wailing. I was like, well, I'm sorry, this isn't going to work. It's only space for one person that's going to give you an opinion on your vocal takes, and that's going to be me. It's not going to be him as well. So I had to that was one kind of thing that had to be kind of dealt with pretty early on. Fortunately, the boys in the band were on the same side as me on that. So we managed to kind of nip that in the bud, as it were. But apart from that, the sessions were really, really went very well. Everything flowed great. It just suddenly struck me that there was something really good there, there really was. And once we got, Dolores' vocal stacked up a little bit with her harmonies and a kind of operatic, should I say, stroke, kind of Gaelic lilt kind of wailing in the background, it really started kind of taking shape. Noel was a very quick learner. He was really keen to learn too. So I was showing him, how like if you put a capo on the guitar, you could do your same chords but in a different chord shape, which then allowed you to layer things without getting too kind of clustered in one EQ range and so on. And we progressed really quite quickly. It seemed to flow really well. The one song that did prove to be a little bit difficult was Linger, believe it or not. There's a couple of things that were sticky in that song. One was getting the tempo of it correct, and also the groove of it. And then the other thing was getting that transition, that the first part, getting that to kind of cross over nicely and feel natural. And it took a little bit of jiggling about to get that to feel right. But we done the track and we done pretty much a lot of work to it. And I'm sitting there one day, I'm going, it just feels lumpy. It doesn't feel right to me. There's something not quite right. And it's to do with the bass drum and the bass line in the verse. And I've suddenly realized that it needed to swing a bit more. I found it wasn't quite right. Now, fortunately for this song, what we had done, we had decided on the tempo. And I think we had done, if I remember rightly, just the drums, there's a shuffle, there's a snare shuffle, which is going all the way through. And I decided I wanted a little bit of control on that against the bass drum and the cymbals and things. So I got Fergal just to do that drum pattern, the snares on its own, and then we overdubbed the bass drum and the other bits and pieces of the kit. I spent quite a bit of time and I still wasn't happy with how Linger was feeling. So I got Mikey back in and Fergal. I said, look, I think the bass drum's got to go dunk, dunk, dunk. It's got to have a little bit dunk, dunk. It's got to swing a bit because I think it was just going dunk, 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 dunk. It just felt a bit flat to me and it didn't feel right. So we did that and straight away I thought, this is sounding a lot better now. It's swinging a little bit more. It's only a subtle thing, but it did make a difference. Basically, after that, all we had to do on the track was, when we got back to London, was take the part that Dolores had written on a keyboard for the strings and then get my friend John Metcalf of the Duke String Quartet to score that out for the song. And he added that lovely little kind of tremolo, high tremolo, right at the very, very front, which worked really well as well. It kind of sets the scene for the song.
So Dolores had written the basic melody that was used.
The main, she'd written that, but it was like a solid line, just like a mono line, should I say, whereas John scored it out properly and made it sound, how it should sound when it was. So yeah, it was kind of interesting. And it's funny because I went back to the demo today, listening to it, because I found it on this 25th anniversary edition that's come out. And it's quite interesting to hear how it radically changed, actually, because on the intro of the demo, there's the guitars going through so much flanger and chorus on the demo thing. I think it sounds really out of tune. It's got that amount of sweep on it that makes it sound really weird. I've forgotten that's how it started. I think that's one of the reasons why we most probably decided not to do it with an electric guitar when we did the version proper. We actually did it with acoustics and went for that natural chorusing that you get when you double track something. And the other key thing we added to the song was, I think on the demo, the vocal started and vocal went all the way through. And I knew that we needed something different. So I said to the guys, let's just do a little section here where we have an instrumental section. And again, Noel had never played any slide guitar in his life, but I could really hear like a George Harrison-esque kind of slide thing.
Beautiful, yeah.
So I had a spare bottle top, proper, slide in my bag. And I said to him, try use this. And we got that little kind of element. So that was a new thing because I forgot that wasn't on the demo. But then all the other songs we did were just, they were just kind of songs that they were all playing in their live set, so they needed a little bit of tweaking here and there. But on the whole, really, everything came together really well. And I really realised that the key thing with the Cranberries was to leave a lot of space for the vocals to occupy and let things hang a little bit. It wasn't a case of powering all the way through with guitars all the way through. We had to be really clever and try and get the right flavour for each guitar overdub. So some songs we would be kind of working away at and took a bit more work. If I remember rightly, I think Waltzing Back was quite a complicated song to get, but it was well worth sticking with because it's a great song. Where songs like Pretty, I always remember that, which is one of my favourites. I remember we'd done a session one day and we'd done a couple of songs. And I said to them, is there anything else you haven't played me yet? Because Pretty I hadn't heard. And they said, I've got this song called Pretty. I said, well, can you just play it to me? And they played it. And Noel starts off with this jung, jung, jung. And he had this lovely kind of chorus going through, a reverb going into a chorus, which made it really sweet. And I went, that's great. Let's do this one right now. Just do a few takes and I'm sure we're going to catch it. And that song, the actual backing track for that one, I think we kind of captured it within like 20 minutes. And did a couple of overdubs, got Dolores on it, and it was finished. So again, that was one of those ones that really kind of just came out of the ether, and it was really quick and easy. Whereas there were others like Linger, which took a little bit of chipping away at.
On Linger, when you said you changed the groove in the verses, did you literally just punched back into the
take just got Mikey and just rewound the tape and said, look, I'm not happy with the way it's, can we try? And I think we might have had spare tracks, so I wasn't going to get rid of what we had. But I said, can you just try playing it this way instead? And it took us a couple of times to try and find the right pattern. I remember kind of doing it and then thinking, that's okay. And then going to Mikey and Ferg, that's still not quite right. Let's play, just do it again. And there was some transitions that needed to be sorted out. But it was worth it because I think, it made it what it is. One of the things we've got with this record is the history of it is, as I said, when we brought it back to the UK, I mixed it at Maison Rouge Studios. We did the string overdubs with the Duke String Quartet. I think they played on a couple of 2 or 3 songs on the record. And then I mixed it and it all went fine. The label accepted, the album and Denny was happy with it. The band were happy with it. They decided to put out Dreams as a single. The idea was that Dreams was going to come out and then the album would be kind of coming out the following month with Linger released as a single. And Dreams came out as a single and it didn't do much. And the album was sent off to be reviewed by all the monthly magazines, at the time, and the weeklies and everything. And there was a bit of a kind of general, like, it's okay, but nothing great. So the British press really kind of, weren't on it. I don't think the British record company were 100% behind it either. So there we are. The album, this Dreams has come out. The album's gone to review. And we're now, I think, in the month of October. And the record company go, I tell you what, we're not going to put it out. We're going to wait till next year. So everything was pulled. There was kind of comments going around saying, are the mixes right? Blah, blah, blah. So they got Dave Bascom to do a remix of Linger. I didn't know about this until way afterwards. I mean, it was like, but apparently the band heard it and said, no, we don't like that. We want to go with the original mix. Anyway, so we get to the following spring. They put out Linger and they put out the album. And the press don't want to review the album again because they'd done the reviews back in October of last year. So the album was reviewed, didn't come out, and now the album's coming out in a complete vacuum. Linger's taken to radio, doesn't do the business either there. So there's a real case of, okay, well, what happens now? And as I said, I picked up on a vibe from the from Ireland, UK, that they didn't really know what to do with it, and so Denny kind of basically sent them on the road. And I think Hot House Flowers were touring Europe, and they just sent the Cranberries on the road with the Hot House Flowers as their support band. And so to all intents and purposes, really, the record was kind of, that's it, it's done. No more singles are going to come out from the album, and that is it. And so the band were, touring and thinking, well, what do we do now? Anyway, so fortunately, Denny Cordell was still chipping away at it in America. And I think he manages to get a video commissioned and made for Linger. And he manages to get that on MTV on a program that was called Alternative Nation.
Remember it very well.
Yeah. And I think, as I said, I think there was a lot more kind of positive vibes towards them from the media in America. And it took off. So the next thing you hear is the Cranberries are on tour, touring around Europe, being, a support band to Hot House Flowers. And they get this phone call from Denny saying, drop everything, you got to get over here now. We're beginning to get a bit of action on Linger.
Incredible.
And so that's what they did. And they went over to America and Linger took off. And the record that was completely dismissed and forgotten about by the British public was re-released and became a huge hit. Right. Exactly the same thing. No remixes, nothing. It was just finally people accepted them for what they are.
But did the British public even really know it existed because nobody was pushing it? That was probably the sad
Well, I don't know. Yeah, perhaps, yeah. I think that's most probably right, actually. The media might have ignored it, but the public took to it. Once they heard it, they liked it. And yeah, so Linger was a hit in America. They went over there. They started touring with Suede, I think. They did a tour with Suede. And by the end of the tours, they were headlining and Suede was supporting.
I remember.
And the rest is history, really. So, I kind of felt really vindicated because I do remember thinking, this isn't right. This is a really good record. And it's just been left to kind of die on the vine, as it were,
My recollection, as a musician was I didn't know about the song until it got big in America. And then I'm like, where has this been my whole life? It was just so beautiful. I mean, your production on it is outstanding because when I think of that song, I think of the vocal, and the string line, and then everything else. It's like you show off everything about it. You walk away going, who is this girl? What is this song? And it's...
Well, it's a strange song because if you think about it, I can't think of any other ballad where the drummer is going, snare drum going all the way through it. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was really quite a hard one to mix because, if you get the drums too far forward, it just overpowers everything. And then if you take it too far back, it just feels really flat because it is pushed along and it's propelled by that snare kind of thing. So, it was one of the more complex songs to mix. As I say, for me, listening back, because I didn't listen to it for a very long time, but again, when this 25th anniversary edition came out and I was able to sit down and really kind of listen to it again as a whole, I was really, pleasantly surprised how well it sounds. It kind of really, I think there was a little moment there where I really did capture, because it's a very delicate thing. 3 young guys and 1 young lady, and they had to be really kind of treated carefully because they were very unsure and very naive. They didn't really know kind of exactly what it was they were doing. They'd already kind of gone through a bit of a period of being burnt slightly, where they'd been recording their first EP with this guy that was kind of controlling them a little bit, and they were a little bit kind of cautious of the big record industry eating them all up. I did have to try and win them over. But I think I did win their trust, and in fact, I know I did because in the end, I've had a very long time working relationship with them. And they thought they were going to be dropped any minute. They really did. They didn't know what else to do. They'd been in the studio with a producer. They made a record. They thought it was all going to go great, and then it kind of, it really didn't take off at all. And so I felt really bad for them because I can go off and go and start working on the Blur record. In fact, I think. So I was kind of happily, working on another record. But I really felt bad for them because I really felt like, this record deserves to be heard. And bless them, once they did start playing, they played their hearts out. They did every gig you could possibly think of, playing up and down the East Coast and then the West Coast of America. And they managed to really, they saw that little chink, of light, and they went for it, and they managed to make it, really count. So, obviously after Linger was released, then they released Dreams in America. And again, that was re-released over here as well. And suddenly they had two huge bona fide hits, which had both been released as singles in the previous year and completely ignored.
What are your recollection of recording Dreams?
It came together really well. I remember thinking, that I had to really focus a bit more on, because the demo was promising, but I needed to get a lot of the guitar textures sorted out on this one. I was a big fan at that time of Being on the Dancing Horses, the Echo and the Bunnymen song, which has that kind of stuttering kind of vibrato guitar that's actually really in time with it kind of, it's quite a strong stutter as well. It's a vibrato. And so I think we got this thing. It was a noise gate, which I basically just had a pulse so the pulse was triggering the noise gate. And so Noel would hit these chords, and so we'd get this kind of, and so again, something to propel it along, but without being a constant kind of, smashing away on the guitar thing. And once we got that, I always remember that being a big kind of part of like, okay, we've got somewhere with this now. This is working really well. And then, Dreams, the other key thing on that, obviously, is that fantastic kind of Gaelic ending, with all the breakdown and that was on the demo as well, if I remember rightly. I think Dolores' boyfriend's name was Mike. I can't remember his surname. And that was great when he came in at the end and did all that kind of Gaelic wailing and stuff. And there was also this wonderful sound that, I don't know, it was a weird instrument he played, just like kind of like a horn thing. And you hear that on the intro of Dreams. And it's not quite in tune with the track, but because of that, it gives it this kind of real depth, this kind of depth that makes the chords sound really fat. Just fours. And I think on that one as well, we might have got Ferg just to really just focus on tapping on his bass drum, just to give it that real strong pulse, and then everything else was overdubbed on top. It was one of those songs I knew it deserved to be a hit. So when it wasn't, I was really quite gutted. But we got there in the end with it,
Looks like you got back into the studio pretty quickly by Modern. You're back in recording the next thing. How quickly? A year later? Less than a year later, maybe.
Yeah, it was great, actually. Well, so if you think about it, so the records come out by the end of that year, after the initial kind of failure, as it were, initially. It then takes off and it's really big. And so the following spring, I go over to New York to see them play some shows. And while I'm there, we go into the Magic Shop, which is a great studio, which I don't think is there anymore. Sadly.
I think it recently went, yes, but I love it. The old Neve, huge.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And we went in to do some demos, really, kind of some test recordings for towards the next album. But it was a really productive session, actually, really good session. And in fact, the tracks came out so well. When we got back to London, I listened to them. I said, I think we can use these as masters for the record, towards the album. There's no point re-recording these again. I think what we've got there, because the sound was really nice, really warm and kind of, nice fat sound. So we used those. And then we started recording some tracks. We were at the Manor. So we started the album proper at the Manor, and then we went. The idea was to do some tracking at the Manor, and then go back to the townhouse and finish off, and finish off everything there. The boys are all staying in the flat upstairs above the studio. I think Dolores was staying in a hotel very nearby with her boyfriend, who became later on her husband. And we made a start on No Need to Argue. Proper. But what happened was I'm a keen skier, and I had a ski trip arranged for this, I think for March. I said to the guys, look, we can do some 3 weeks or so of recording, 3-4 weeks, and then I'm going to go skiing. I said, but why don't you guys come too? We can, make it a break halfway through the album. Let's all, let's do that. The guys hadn't really skied before. So I said to them, you must have your ski lessons in the morning, and then we'll ski together in the afternoon. So we get about 2 days into the holiday, and I meet the guys and Dolores at lunchtime. We have our lunch, and we're going to go do a bit of skiing. And we're all skiing together, nice and simple, going down a simple slope. And one of the lads falls over, so I'm helping him get his boot back into his ski and everything and so on. Dolores carries on down the hill to the bottom and goes back up on the lift again. And I said to her, wait for us, don't go off on your own. Anyway, because it took a bit of a while getting one of the guys back, back into his skis, we got to the bottom and she's gone back up. So I'm thinking, oh God. So we get on the chair, go back up the mountain, and I'm looking down below, and I can see this person lying on the floor with a bunch of people all around her, and I'm thinking, oh, for God's sake, please don't. I hope that's not glorious. Anyway, sure enough, I get off the chair, ski down to where Dolores is lying there, and it's bad. She's been put into one of these, wagons, and they're taking her down the hill. So, God, we're waiting to hear what the damage is. Anyway, cut a long story short, she had completely torn a cruciate ligament. So she was farmed off to Grenoble, which is miles away, about 2-3 hour drive back down the valley. And she is now out of action for a while. So this was not so bad for the recording so much, but it was more going to be a problem for the touring because, at this point, Dolores had already turned into someone who was much more of a front woman. She was doing lots of jumping around on stage and so on and so forth. So the record company and the management weren't best pleased to hear that. You can believe
Producer takes band away on skiing trip.
And ruins her knee. Anyway. But apart from all that, the session we started at the Manor was really good, actually. It was the band had just been doing so much playing and touring. They really were on top of their game. I always remember them we'd done a few songs and then they said, we've got this heavier one we want to do. And, at the time, because it was a heavy song and the Cranberries were known for their more gentle songs, there wasn't this pressure of it's going to be a single. It's just like, okay, it's going to be the rocker on the album, And of course, it turned out to be Zombie. But it was evident as soon as we started doing takes on this, it was going to be, a key song. And this is when we're still working on tape. So actually, I remember rightly, I think it was most probably 2 or 3 takes of it that I edited together using, 2-inch edits. So I would say to the guys, leave it with me, and they'll go away, and I'd just be there, reels of 2-inch. And it's always so much scarier cutting 2-inch. I mean, cutting 1/2-inch mixes is fine, but when you're dealing with, 2-inch, it's. But we got there in the end, and it sounded great, I thought. So, because the thing about Zombie, it couldn't be something you could do to a click. It had to have that kind of push and pull, the way it slows down at the end and it takes off again. It needed that live approach. That was a key song for us as well, When you're making a track and you're not worried about it being a single, you're not getting so fretful about it, that can lead to your best work, You just work for the strength of the song rather than the strength of the marketing. Or, who's it going to please? Which algorithm is it going to fit in? You just do it and it works. And that was the case with Zombie, it really was. I always remember the other track on that album was Oh to My Family. Again, that was a little bit like Linger. That took a little bit of experimenting with the feel of the drums and the bass where it sat in the groove. And I always remember the first note, and it still does to this day, always sounds out of tune to me. And I would get Dolores to go back in and say, Dolores, can you get one more go at doing that intro? And I think I drove her mad in the end. And I'm still to this day, I'm still going to go slightly when I hear it. But it's just kind of small details, really, I guess.
I love about Zombie, though, is it's heavy, but it doesn't go, how can I describe it? It doesn't go full grunge. It makes perfect sense. You guys were definitely, when Zombie came out, it was about as current as you could get, the whole sound, everything.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest with you, the grunge thing was definitely the reference point for me on that record. I mean, I was a huge fan, and so was Noel. I think the whole band were, of the first Smashing Pumpkins album, which I still think is an incredible sounding record.
It is an incredible album, yeah.
So it was that density, and the two guitars slightly different, one being a Fender, one being a Gibson in each speaker, and different amps, and so, but playing the same part, but because of the EQ spread on them, sonically they complement rather than just being exactly the same thing twice, So that was a key part, really. I mean, that was definitely my kind of reference in my head when I was working on Zombie, without a doubt.
There's a beauty in the parts, a simplicity, a naivety in the parts, like that little descending guitar line sounds like it's written by Dolores. Oh, no,
It is.
no,
It is.
oh, no. It sounds like something a singer would write, that they would sing to a guitar player, say, hey, this is the part I want you to play. Sometimes as musicians, I know as a guitar player, you kind of get caught up in some cool technical part that you've figured out. The naivety to that fits the song so well. And
No, I mean, I was keen for Dolores to play it. I mean, she's not technically the best guitar player in the world by any stretch of the imagination, but the way she played it, it just felt right. Yeah. Because I think Noel tried to play it and it didn't feel right at all. It needed her kind of slightly hesitant, finding her way down the neck. It gave it something. Yeah. So, it was important that she played that part. And also I wanted her to, so she felt like she was doing more than just singing, I say more than just singing, but she was keen to play guitar. And so it was something that was really important, really, I think. Yeah, I mean, there's some great songs actually on this second record. I mean, I'm particularly fond of the more mellow ones like 21 and Empty. I think are fantastic. And then Daffodil Lament, which is quite a complex song. It's kind of nearly like prog rock, the way it kind of goes through different stages of the song. The second album is always a difficult kind of thing. A lot of bands do trip up on it. It's the first albums you get signed on, and you've had all the time in the world to write them, and then your first album takes off, and you've got to write your second album. And a lot of bands kind of don't quite get it right. But we actually did get this get it right, really. I mean, they come up with some great songs on this record. I think they were so full of optimism then. I think that's the thing that really comes through. They'd done the first album and it was just them doing what they liked, and they suddenly realized they had a huge hit with that. They didn't have to fit into anyone else's kind of idea of what to do to become, they got there on their own terms. So it gave them a lot of confidence. So when they lashed into writing songs for this second album, I think they were just feeling very positive and full of optimism. And I think that kind of just drove them to be very prolific,
Yeah, it's 13 tracks, and then there's a bunch of bonus tracks on the album now. I see that there's a cover, if you get the new version of Close to You.
Close to You.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that song. Well, I'm a bit of a closet Carpenters fan, to be honest. I think those records sound incredible. I always remember when I was a kid, my mum and dad had that brown Carpenters album. I can see it now. It was a brown cover with gold inlay on it. And
my mum had that too.
Karen Carpenter, what a singer! Again, another fantastic female singer. So when the band said to me, I think they had to do it for a reason. There was a reason why they had to do Close to You. I'm not sure what it was. It might have been a tribute thing to Karen. I'm not sure. So I was really into the idea of doing it. I was, and we did that at Townhouse. I think that was done in the session at Townhouse. Yeah, when we were back in London. Yeah, there's some good extra tracks on the record, actually. There's some good things there, I think. But for me, the main thing, as with all these records, for me, the key thing is the main album, and that obviously the extras are great for collectors and everything. Yeah. But I think what I focused on with Noel, I think when I first met Noel, like Graham, I think Noel was a Gibson player. I think Noel had I think he was using a Les Paul when I first met him. And I've got a really nice 1967 Telecaster, which is what I gave to Graham to play. And that's what Graham kind of made Graham kind of gravitate towards Telecasters in the end, I think. And I did the same thing with Noel, really. I kind of said to him, what we've got to do is, rather than trying to do everything with the same kind of guitar, the same pickups and the same amplification, is, sometimes play the same part with a Telecaster or something completely different in the EQ curve. And if that's not enough, then we try a capo, and if we wanted a bit of sparkle, then we're going to overdub an acoustic as well, just so we get that top end from an acoustic. So it was a case of not layering too much, but just trying to get the textures right. Because even Noel would admit it himself. Back then, he was probably the most technical-minded guitar player. He just knew his parts, and he had his way of writing. Sometimes the chords were kind of not fully formed chords, it could have been one thing or the other, and it was where the bass note went that Mikey was playing that actually determined what the actual chord was, But we got on very well, Noel and I. We clicked straight away. So he was very receptive to our ideas, and also he started investing in pedals. Obviously he was very because by this time, I think they'd come to see Blur play live. In fact, I know they had. We saw Blur play some gigs between Modern Life and Park Life at the Shepherd's Bush Empire. So we were at the townhouse. We literally walked up the road to the Shepherd's Bush Empire, and I think they were blown away by how good Blur were live. And I think Noel was really impressed with Graham and the way his use of pedals and everything. So Noel kind of started investing quite heavily in pedals and things as well, which was useful. But I wouldn't say he used them as much as Graham did, but it definitely gave him a little bit more kind of texture and colour, as it were, to play with. But the main thing was, as I said, was like making sure that we chose the right guitar for the right part. And then, do you
have go-to amps?
For their live shows, because of the extra volume they needed and so on, they gravitated towards kind of Marshall stacks and so on. But to be honest with you, in the studio, I'm not a huge fan of those. I much prefer smaller amps. And so I most of the time, I think I was in the studio with Noel. We used a Vox AC30 for most of the work. I might be wrong, but I'm pretty certain that was what we used the majority.
That makes some sense with a lot of your productions. I feel like I can hear Vox/Fender amps, especially Vox because of the mid range. So on some of the, especially on the arpeggiated stuff, that the way they kind of dance, the extra mid seem to.
Yeah, I mean, I think we might have used the Marshalls only on something like Zombie, but the rest of the time, I think most of the time it would have been. Either a Vox AC30, sometimes a Fender Twin. I was never quite a fan of the Fender Twins. For me, they had a real naggly kind of mid-range that kind of got a little bit on my nerves, so I didn't like them so much. I'm a bigger fan of some of the other amps that Fender have made.
And then miking, are you a 57 guy? What's your...
Yeah, I mean, quite often, sometimes a ribbon mic as well. I mean, back then, I don't think I was using ribbon mics quite as much. I might have been using perhaps even an RE20.
Oh, nice.
As well, but not so close. Or sometimes even an 87, just, back in the room a little bit, It depended on the part, really. I mean, sometimes if I wasn't too sure what I wanted, I wouldn't use too much of the room mic because I knew I could always add that later, and I would, at this point, because we were working on 24 track most of the time, I couldn't commit. I didn't want to do the guitars on, two different tracks. I wanted to kind of get the balance of the mics and get them down on one channel, on one track. Unless I was really sure I wanted the room mic, I wouldn't record a room mic as well. I'd leave that for later.
Are you an SSL guy? Was that your choice?
I mean, back then everything was SSL. I mean, all the studios I've mentioned, apart from the Magic Shop where we worked on that lovely old Neve, they were all SSL, Townhouse, the Manor, they're all part of the same studio chain. Maison Rouge, where I mixed, was all SSL. And in fact, Warren, this was the first time actually, because I had grown up really on SSL. It was so interesting for me to hear something that had been recorded through the old Neve that I'd heard when I did the Magic Shop, because for me, it was the first time I'd actually been able to really kind of do a kind of an ear check, like the difference. Because like most of the engineers back in those days in the 80s and 90s, we just used to record everything through the mic amps at the top of the channel on the SSL. We didn't dig out all these old classic kind of mic amps. It just wasn't the done thing. Why muddy the waters? Just get on with it, and use. And then for me, it was quite interesting to suddenly hear that, whoa, there is a difference. I can hear this now. So it was kind of like, it was a bit of for me, a bit of an ear opener,
Yep.
Hearing that kind of subtle difference.
But it is interesting because now, of course, we're so used to this idea that you go in the perfect world as you track everything on the Neve and then you mix on the SSL. But all these records that we love from like the late 70s and the 80s and the early 90s that were made in Britain, in the UK, were all, as you say, tracked and mixed on SSLs. Did you have favourite rack effects units that you were into in those days?
I was a huge fan of the Lexicon the 224X. And then obviously the 480L came out, and that was great. I mean, that had those nice long, luscious kind of infinite reverbs on, both of those reverb units, and I use those to quite a degree on both the Smiths and Streety column and the Cranberries, capturing a note and just making it go on for a long time and so on. Yeah, and in fact, Dreams starts off with the trick that I learned working with the Smiths, acoustic guitar going through a big reverb, turn over the tape, print that reverb, turn it back over again, you get that nice shang, you get that nice kind of, sweep, and all those things, all the things that I'd learned working with Johnny and so on, I was able to bring into use again with the Cranberries. I think the SPX 90, I remember that being a big thing in all the studios I was working in at the time. For the symphonic setting, I used to like that symphonic setting on the SPX 90s and 900s. They were good, and of course everyone was using the AMS delay units. Simple, easy to use, and did what it said on the tin, basically.
Did you use the AMS to trigger any snares or anything like that?
Yes, did occasionally. Yeah, I mean that was the first kind of delving into sampling, wasn't it, for a lot of us? It was kind of capturing something. I think you had 1 point something seconds of sampling time. It depended on how many, how much memory was in the unit itself. But that was enough to, sometimes, to capture something and trigger a bass drum or a snare or something if you needed it.
Amazing.
And and then obviously then I went out and bought myself an Akai sampler, which is what I think I had around the time of, these records as well.
So were you triggering, when you came to mix, were you triggering any snare samples or kicks or anything like that?
Sometimes, yeah, I would be. It would be rare that I would use it purely the sample. It would often be there as a kind of bolster in the background, or because again it was always very apparent very early on, especially when you didn't have any kind of dynamics on those triggering samples, that any drum fill just sounded really wrong. So sometimes you just ride the sample down at that point when there's a real drum fill, put the real snare back up and then kind of bring it back in again. All the things that you can do with an SSL, when you can record your movements.
I assume now are you almost entirely in the box when it comes to mixing, or do you still like to go and mix on a console?
No, it's a bit of a hybrid for me. I've got an Audience Zen desk, 16 faders, so I bring everything up 16 faders, and then I can I normally have the drums, say, between 1 and 4, so it'd be bass drum, snare, and then the rest of the kit on 3 and 4. And then guitars on 5 and 6, bass on 7, vocal on 8, 9 and 10 would be my BVs. And then the other pairs will be either more guitars or keyboards or miscellaneous percussion, whatever. And that normally gives me the spread that I want, so I can quickly get a balance, if I do need to move faders at all, or indeed if I need to put extra processing across those fader groups. Because I do like to do some processing, outside the box. There's certain things I like to use. And that's how I tend to work these days. That's the compromise I've had, because no one really goes into an SSL studio anymore. There just isn't the budget there to do it. It's a shame, because I kind of miss it. I do kind of miss the days when you used to go in and you see your work kind of spread out across the desk. I think it's to say everything's changed, but if you can find a way that works, then good for it, stick with it. And as I say, for me, the hybrid system tends to work best. So after the first 2 albums, there was I think there was quite a long time, about 8 years or so perhaps, before I was to work with them again. And I worked with them in the early 2000s on an album called Wake Up, Smell the Coffee. So that was recorded, I think I went to, where did I go to record that one? I think that was recorded in Ireland. Yeah, we did that at Windmill Lane. The big Windmill Lane, the one that's near where U2 had their place by the docks. And again, I had a really good heart-to-heart with Dolores. I said to her, look, really, I know you've been touring the world, you've been doing all these big shows, you've been projecting yourself as a rock singer, blah, blah, blah. I said, but for me, the charm about what the Cranberries is about is that a little bit more intimacy. And can we try and get back towards that? And that was the first steps that we did on that record, Wake Up, Smell the Coffee. We went even more down that route, I think, when we made the next album, Roses, which we actually did in Canada. And this was interesting because by this time, it was obvious that because of technology and so on, Noel was making demos at home on Logic, and Dolores was doing stuff sometimes with session people in America. So again, that was the first one where we started kind of hearing, there was some stuff that was kind of worked on by swapping files, as it were. Like Noel was sending stuff over to her and she was working on it, or then sending things back. And there was a couple of tracks there where some of the work that Noel had done on his demos in Logic were really, really kind of very, very good. And like there's some loops and things we wanted to keep. So that was the first time when we started to kind of like use some of the loops and the demos as a starting point for the recording. Unfortunately, that album came out. That was an album that came out when they were between record deals. And I think it was just licensed to a smaller label, and it never really got the recognition that it deserves. But I think Roses actually has got some really good tracks on it. Very sadly, Dolores passed away a few years back. And at this point, the band had already made a start on collating songs for what was going to be a new album. After a couple of months of when she died, Noel kind of came to me with the idea of listening through to what they've got to see if it would be worth. The band wanted to finish the album. Basically, they wanted to kind of say, like, we made a start on it. We were doing all these demos and making these recordings, swapping files backwards and forwards over the Atlantic, and we want to see if there's anything there we can use to do an album really as a tribute to Dolores. Now, to be fair, I was quite cautious about this because I didn't want to be seen as being taking advantage of the fact, a posthumous album trying to cash in on Dolores' passing or anything like that. And I also wanted to make sure that anything we did didn't destroy the legacy of what they'd achieved. So I just said to Noel, can you just send me everything you've got, and I'll go through everything that we have, transfer it into Pro Tools, and just see if we can start using that as a basis for the record. And having collated what they had given me, I felt there was something there that was worth putting out. As I said, once I had these recordings and collated them all in Pro Tools, I was able then to go through like different playlists and so on and get as much information as I could, both different vocal takes and so on out of some of the demos that she'd done, and try and make things a bit longer, because sometimes some of the songs were literally just kind of sketches, like a verse, chorus and finish, and just try and make it work more in a more structured fashion. Again, some of the songs that she had demoed, she had done in a studio with some session players as well, so they'd been pretty well recorded. But we didn't want the session players, obviously, on the recordings. We wanted it to be the band. So I literally kind of used the vocal, the chord sequence and a vocal, and made a click track out. Used the original demo as a click track and got the guys to play to that. So to cut a long story short, the guys came over to London. We spent 3 weeks at a studio where they played over these tracks that I'd kind of edited from the demos and things and so on. And it all came together really well, actually. It was traumatic for the band, I think, because obviously for them to be in the studio and recording and putting on their headphones and suddenly hearing Dolores' voice kind of coming through, was quite an emotional thing for them. We kind of stuck at it, and I've got a good working relationship with them. So we actually managed to really kind of knuckle down and get the work done in quite a short period of time. And the saddest thing really was when we did the very last track. In fact, the track we did finish off last was a track called In the End, and that's the last track on the album. So, and I always remember Mikey and Ferg coming back in after they'd done the playing to it, and then coming back in and kind of going, well, that's it now. Because normally in the past, when they finished an album, they're going, right, here we go, we're going to go on tour, we're going to play these songs again live, and we're going to, celebrate them, really. Whereas now, can't do that. It's just literally a studio thing only. And so I really felt for them, because I could tell it was quite an emotional moment for them. This is it. This is the last thing we'll ever do. That was pretty tough. But I think we came out with an album that stands up well, and as I said, I don't think anyone can accuse us of kind of scraping the barrel. It was really a case of it being done with a lot of love and affection. I think it stands up okay. I really do. I think it's a fine record.
Yeah, I remember it did really well in Europe. Yeah, I mean it was top 10 pretty much everywhere. Yeah. I remember listening to it when it came out and loving it. Sounds very credible, and I do like the fact that there's definitely you can hear where they got a little bit more rock, but at the same time there's still a nod to what made those first two records sound so great.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But, I mean, for me, I mean, this happens with a lot of acts. I really love the earlier records. There's something about because I don't know what it is. There's certain magic. It could be the naivety. It could be the sense of exploration. I don't know, but there was some magic really captured in those first two albums, which I think is hard to beat. Really, it really is.
So I really hope you enjoyed that. That was a wonderful time. Thank you, Stephen, for giving us so much of your time and really letting us know so much about the Cranberries. Thanks ever so much. I hope you enjoyed that. Thank you ever so much, Stephen, for giving us so much of your time and enlightening us on some incredible information about those beautiful albums that you made with the Cranberries. Thanks, everybody. Please leave any comments and questions below. Check out, there's some more videos coming on the Cranberries. So long, farewell, auf Wiedersehen, au revoir, adios, adio, goodbye, tschüss.